Yada da da da, yidi da da da, ha da 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 da, yidi da da da, yidi da da da, yidi da, yidi da da da, yidi da 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 da, yidi da da da. Iridai yandai, yadidai yo. Iridai randai, iridadadadai, iridadadai, iridai yandai, adidai yo. Iridai randai, iridadadadai. Da da da, ah da da, ah da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ah da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, di da da da. Hare Rai Rai Anda, Hare Rai Rai Yo, Hare Rai Rai Anda, Hare Ra 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 Ra, Hare Rai Rai Anda, Hare Rai Rai Yo, Hare Rai Rai Anda. Hare ra 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 ra, Hare ra ya yanda, Hare ra ya yo, Hare ra ya yanda, Hare ra 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 ra, oh, Hare ra ya yanda, Hare ra ra yo. Hare Rai Rai Andai, Hare Ra 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 Ra. Welcome back, everyone. Good to see you. Can folks hear me all right? Okay, wonderful. Great to see y'all tonight. Shalom, welcome and or welcome back for part 2 of the basics of Jewish prayer, our 6-part series. Once again, I'm Jake Ehrlich, he, him pronouns. I'm the Community Engagement Associate for Congregation Techia, a Reconstructionist community based in Metro Detroit, Michigan. And once again, this series is sponsored in part through the generosity of the D. Dan, and Betty Kahn Foundation and by viewers and prayers like you. So if you are not a member of Congregation Techia, we invite you to make a donation at the level of your ability on our website to support us in our work to provide accessible, progressive Jewish content and Jewish life for folks, not only in Southeast Michigan, but apparently all around the world as well. So, okay, let's get into it. All right, so we'll start off. Last week, we talked about blessings. So to start us off, I want to hear from you about what were some of these blessings that you said in the past week. Remember, the homework was to set an attainable, realistic quota of blessings that you could say until our next session. So I'd love to hear from a handful of y'all about some of the blessings that you said. Victoria, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Jake. Since you allowed me to start off with the Baruch, of course, but to add my own words, I made blessings for full tanks of gas, for getting on a plane, for the community of Syracuse, which I visited, for my dog. There was a range, but the good news is I found plenty to bless.
Beautiful. Thank you, Victoria. Oh, and I just wanted to remind folks that we are recording these sessions and putting them up on YouTube. And so uh, you probably won't be viewable unless you won't show up on the video unless you have your camera on and you speak. So if you want to be extra cautious about that, you're welcome to keep your camera off. But just wanted to remind folks that. Yeah, Rosemary, let's hear from you.
I said a blessing over Starbucks because I got a lot of Starbucks this past week. I said blessings over simple things like not tripping over my shoes, like silly stuff, kind of.
That's great. And there are actually, traditional blessings that come to mind for certainly for any kinds of food or drink, but also one of the morning blessings, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim, hamechin mitzadei gaver, who firms up my footsteps, is part of the formal morning blessings that one is enjoined to say upon arising. Sometimes people say that blessing when they're tying their shoes. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to share about blessings that you said? Or if you didn't, if you didn't get your homework done, you can make up a blessing on the spot for something you're feeling grateful for right now.
I can share. I also wanted to introduce myself. I missed the first session in person, but I did watch it, and I'm really excited to get to be here with all of you. And I'm Robin. I live in Ypsilanti, and I'm really excited to get to connect and be part of this course. I said blessings over bread and candles, over the week, and also for the autumn leaves and for the crocuses I'm planted in the ground, and they're coming up in the spring. And it really inspired me to want to learn more of the Hebrew blessings, all of the different brachas, and learn how to sing them, because I realized so much of what I love about the few that I know really well is being able to sing them and how joyful that feels. So I want to learn how to sing more of the blessings.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robin, and welcome. And yeah, maybe we'll. It's occurring to me that tunes and singing wasn't part of the framework that I put into the course, but we maybe for our final session we'll work some of that in, or we can work some of it in as we go. Can we hear one more person want to share about some blessings? Yeah, Sarah.
Well, I joined a little bit on Zoom the Shabbat morning, so we did some of the morning blessings. The shahar, would you have shaharim, or what do you call it?
Yeah, shacharit.
Yeah, shacharit. Yeah, and I've been trying to do that in the morning. Is kind of go through the Hebrew ones, kind of blessing for being awake, for distinguishing day and night, for being made in God's image. That's been one that I've been really focusing on. And also, well, it was the half anniversary of my mother's passing away. So I did say the Mourner's Kaddish for her with the what is it? The group, what's it called when you have the group, the
Minyan.
Yeah, the minyan. Yeah. And yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so something we maybe touched on last session but didn't go deep into is that the daily prayer book, weekday and Shabbat morning, features a series of morning blessings. There's about 10 of them or so that can be said every day. And some of them are what Sarah was just referring to. Yeah, the having the discernment to tell the difference between day and night, for being able to open our eyelids, for being able to straighten ourselves up after we're bent over, all kinds of things that if you're looking for a little morning gratitude practice or mindfulness practice, the Birkot HaShachar, the blessings, the dawn blessings, are a great place to turn to. Oh, and I love that, seeing what Mary put in the chat, that it was so easy to do 14 blessings in 7 minutes, just thinking about the people that you love and being grateful for them. That's really sweet. Okay, well, I'll encourage you all to keep up with the blessings practice. You know, maybe you'll reach your 100 brachas a day quota that Rabbi Meir was talking about. But you know, it's a great thing to habituate yourself to do, and it's great as a practice, and it's great as a sort of container for that. When you're experiencing something, that you can find the words to say. And I'll also just say that in addition to all of these wonderful things that we can be thankful for and say blessings for, there are also brachas that one can say upon hearing bad news, like learning of someone's death, to say the blessing Baruch Dayan Emet, blessed be the true judge, which are kind of like words for a time when there are no words. So sometimes having these formulae at hand can be really useful. Okay, so keep up with your brachas, but we're going to change our focus to a different element of Jewish prayer tonight. So here's our outline for the course. Last week we did some foundations and we covered the blessing formula. This week we're going to be talking about the service structure. Yes, and next week we'll be doing Shema and everything that goes along with it, and then 2 weeks on the Amidah. I did want to mention that in the emails you may have seen that there is a Google form for folks who are looking for a chavruta, for a study buddy or a spiritual practice buddy. So if you're looking for someone to kind of practice and discuss with, please fill out that form and we'll try to match you up with someone. The link is in the email. Okay, so let's get into the content of tonight. So, when it comes to Jewish prayer, there are 3 main services of daily Jewish prayer. You may have heard this terminology. I'm going to services, which is kind of a strange thing. But, you know, so it refers to a religious service. It refers to a structured time, set period of prayer with a certain liturgy that corresponds to it. So there are 3 main services of daily Jewish prayer. So every day, traditional Jews pray 3 times a day, according to this threefold structure. In the same way that observant Muslims pray 5 times a day, Jews do 3 times a day. So these 3 structures are Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv. And we've heard a little bit about Shacharit. We heard Sarah mention it, and we were talking about Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings. But Shacharit is our morning prayer. Shachar is the word for dawn or daybreak. So the prayer that you say in the morning is Shacharit, the morning prayer. Now, these are not just singular prayers. It's not just there's one morning prayer. It's a certain liturgy, series of prayers. But we'll get into what all this contains. The afternoon prayer is called Mincha. Mincha means gift. We'll get into why it is called Mincha, but it's a little confusing. The evening prayer, Ma'ariv, comes from the Hebrew word Erev, which means evening. You may have heard people refer to Erev Shabbat is Shabbat evening. Erev Pesach is the evening of Pesach. Some people also call Ma'ariv Arvit. Sephardic communities often refer to Ma'ariv as Arvit. But it's from the same root, meaning evening. So you have your morning, your afternoon, your evening prayers. Two of them are simply referred to by the dawn prayer. Shacharit happens at the dawn time, Shachar. The evening prayer, Ma'ariv, happens in the Erev. Okay, already see a question. Okay, Raz, what's up?
I'm just curious about the very odd timeframes. 5:44, 10:34, 12:42, 5:47. And then my second question is there an overlap prayer since the Mincha seems to end at 5:47, but the Mariv starts at 5:17? So is there like an overlap prayer?
Yeah, so these are great questions to take us to exactly what I wanted to address, which is this notion of zmanim. So zman, Z-M-A-N, as transliterated into English, or Zayin Mem Nun, zman, means time. Now, each of these prayers has a certain range of times during which it can be said. The way that this works is that there's an ancient sort of timekeeping that goes on that is different from the way that we measure time with our standardized clocks and daylight saving times and all that kind of stuff. So traditional Jewish timekeeping for each day takes the daylight hours and divides that time into 10 blocks. And so there are different kind of markers of these times, such as the first sight of the sun in the morning, or the appearance of stars at night, or things like that, or and different kind of gradations around what these boundaries should be. And as such, it's kind of a specialized field of knowledge. And what a lot of people, most people do, is that they consult authorities about it. Back in the day, that this would mean asking learned people or looking at charts that are, for public viewing. And nowadays, mostly this means consulting the internet or using an app. And so Chabad.org, the great Jewish missionary organization that wants to really spread Jewish knowledge, has a free service for informing you of all of the zmanim, all of the times, the proper times to say each prayer. So you'll see that these zmanim that I selected for a couple of days ago, Shacharit can be said, the earliest it can be said, they say, on this date, corresponding to Detroit, because of course, your latitude and longitude matters when it comes to determining your daylight hours. They say the earliest was 5:45. The latest is this kind of mid-morning mark that they set at 10:34 for that day in that place. Afternoon prayer, we have the times listed there, and evening prayer as well. Now, there are different opinions within different communities about what the precise guidelines, the precise boundaries that should be followed are. So it's really a matter of custom. But you are right to point out, Raz, that mincha, the latest mincha that you can say, is later than the earliest mariv that you can say. And so in a lot of communities, they do a sort of smush together mincha mariv. That's the great, like, on your way home from work, get your davening in, mincha mariv, for the price of one. And you'll also note that mariv, you can say it till midnight. And then some people say, well, really, if you need to, you can say it by daybreak, until daybreak. The discussion of when you can say the evening Shema, by when do you need to have said it, is actually the first moments of the Mishnah. The first questions that the Mishnah, the Code of Jewish Law, asks is about when can you say Shema? Okay. Now we're gonna learn more about these three services. Okay. So these three services are set methods or packages of prayer, whether you're praying alone or with a community. The idea is that you are following these kinds of services, though some things are omitted, some things change depending on if you say them with a group, with a quorum, or in Hebrew, a minyan of 9 other Jews, versus if you say them alone. Some prayers are said just in a group, some prayers are said just alone, and some of them look different depending on who you're with when you're saying them. There is also, I should also mention, in addition to these 3 prayer services, there is also a service that you may have heard of called Musaf, which means additional. And that's the additional service that happens on Shabbat and festivals, sort of tacked on to the latter part, the last moments of the morning service. You get kind of a instant replay, and you get Musaf, a little bit of extra service. Now, you may or may not be familiar with this because the Reform movement and to a large extent the Reconstructionist movement have done away with Musaf for different reasons, but that's sort of a matter for another time, but we can talk about that a bit later in the Q&A. But so you may or may not have heard of Musaf, but if you have, that's a 4th service that can happen. So that would be between Shacharit and Mincha. Now, who knows about the 5th service? When is it? Who can tell me when there's a 5th Jewish prayer service?
Yom Kippur?
Yeah, you got it, Stacy. That's right. So on Yom Kippur, there's a special 5th prayer service called Ne'ilah, the service of the closing of the gates. And that's the only time of year that we do that. So it's an extra special time. These services have kind of been set. The core structure of them has been set for some 1,500 years, probably. And it's worth noting, I want to share that I've heard that Jewish prayer is sort of akin to freeze-dried soup. You ever have freeze-dried soup and it's like in the container, you have to add the hot water, you know? And so the idea is that we receive this tradition of set prayers, of everything, all the ingredients are there for us, but we have to bring ourselves to it. So that comes in the name of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory. Okay, so we're getting to where do these prayers come from? Because it's sort of important to understand this, to have a full sense of how to relate to prayer. So why are there these 3 prayers? Can someone read for me on the box on the left-hand side where it says Barachot 26b? This is a selection of the Talmud, Barachot, page 26, on the B side of the verso, I think, a folio or verso.
Sure,
the
I'll
back
read it.
page. Great, thank you.
It started with Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina.
Yeah, Chanina.
Hanina. The practice of praying three times daily is ancient. Prayers were introduced by the patriarchs. It was taught in the Barahita in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina. Abraham instituted the morning prayer as it started when Abraham came to look out over Sodom the day after he had prayed on its behalf. And Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Genesis 19:27. And from the context as well as the language utilized in that verse, the verb standing means nothing other than prayer. Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer as it's stated, as Isaac went out to converse Lashua in the field toward evening, Genesis 24:63. And the conversation meant nothing other than prayer. Jacob instituted the evening prayer as it stated, and he encountered the place and he slept there for the sun had set. Genesis 28:11.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Who can give us a kind of summary of what that says? Who can kind of paraphrase that for us? What's the scoop? What does Rabbi Yossi say? Where does 3 times a day prayer come from?
I can take a stab at it. What I basically understand from this is that Rabbi Yosei is saying that these prayers come from Genesis, and these times where we hear that Jacob and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did these certain things at certain times of day, and it's interpreted to mean like we know that what it actually meant was nothing other than prayer, that they did these at these times of day.
Yeah, you got it, Robin. Exactly. So they're looking to the Torah and they see, oh, Abraham did this thing in the morning. What did he do? He got up and stood. And so they say, oh, standing, of course, that must mean prayer. And same with Isaac. He went lasuach basadeh. He was conversing in the field. Now this word lasuach can also refer to meditation, interestingly. So they say, oh, Isaac was doing this in the evening, so that must be in the afternoon. So this must be the afternoon prayer, and same with Jacob, who had an encounter in the night. So they say, where does 3 prayers come from? The patriarchs did it, and conveniently, Abraham, the first patriarch, did the morning thing. Isaac, the middle patriarch, did the midday thing, and Jacob, the third patriarch, did the third prayer of the day. Pretty simple. Sounds good to me. Nice and neat. Now, there's actually a further explanation that's sort of in tension with this, or at least in conversation with this. So could someone read in the blue text about this Baraita, which means a teaching from the time of the Mishnah, so an ancient teaching, where it says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi?
I can if you'd like. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
All right, I'll do this one. Thanks. And it was taught in a Baraita in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi that the laws of prayer are based on the laws of daily offerings in the temple. Why did the rabbi say that the morning prayer may be recited until noon? Because although the daily morning offering is typically brought early in the morning, it may be sacrificed until noon. And why did the rabbis say that the afternoon prayer may be recited until evening? Because the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed until the evening. And why did they say that the evening prayer is not fixed? Because the burning of the limbs and fats of the offerings that were not consumed by the fire on the altar until the evening. Oops, I guess that's a typo, sorry. They remained on the altar and were offered continuously throughout the entire night.
Yeah, so who can kind of digest that for us, paraphrase that? Yeah, Victoria?
So in the rabbinic era, the prayers took the place of sacrifices, and so they moved into those slots.
Exactly. So this is kind of a foundational idea about prayer in Jewish tradition, is that we have to understand that what we practice is called, in some forms, called as rabbinic Judaism. It's the Judaism of the rabbis. Now, the rabbis were a group of scholars and such who lived roughly in the Common Era, because in the year 70 of the Common Era, the temple was destroyed, and that would be the second temple. So ancient Israelite religion, the stuff that's described in the Torah, the stuff that happens in the books of the prophets, all that kind of stuff, that's not quite Judaism. That's not what they're not doing Jewish the same way that we do. The way that they do Jewish, the way that they connect to God and exercise their religion is by means of sacrifice. Now, what happens when the temple is destroyed twice, and then great exile occurs in diaspora, the rabbis have to reconstruct Judaism without a temple. And so, just like Victoria said, using some of the spiritual structure of basically using the agenda of the temple, they've filled the activities with prayer instead of sacrifice. Now, we talked about how the midday service is called mincha, a gift. That comes from the sacrificial terminology. Shacharit means morning, Mariv means evening. Mincha, the gift offering, that's a kind of offering that you would give in the temple. So that's where that comes from. Okay, how's this sounding to folks? Any questions about this so far? About our three-part, 3 services a day kind of thing for prayer? Yeah, Robin?
I was just curious when this first quote we have from Rabbi Yosei, like when this is from, like when this explanation of it coming from the patriarchs fits in historically.
Yeah, great question. So the text that we're looking at is from the Talmud. The Talmud is sort of collected and fully assembled around the years like 600, 700 CE, but it's based off, but what the Talmud is a collection of discussions on the content of the Mishnah, which is codified around 200 CE, which itself is just codified in that there had been a sort of lots and lots of oral teachings that were considered authoritative already, that were kind of just in the air. So I don't actually know sort of what strata of text we're looking at right here, but I think it's safe to say that it's a pretty, like I would say pretty ancient, like pretty old, yeah, not medieval. I think that it's an early strata of rabbinic thought. Cool. Any other questions before we get on to the what these services actually contain? Okay, well, feel free to always put questions in the chat, and I'll just remind folks that after we'll end at 8:30 and then Eastern time, and following that I'll stick around for a little bit for some Q&A, and we'll stop the recording for that. Okay, so we talked about 3 services a day, Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv. Now, what do these services contain? Well, luckily, they're all pretty much following the same structure. Each service, each Jewish prayer service follows roughly the same basic structure. We start with a warm-up. The first kind of very significant, non-negotiable part of prayer is the Shema, which is the declaration of God's unity. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Then we move into the next non-negotiable element is the Amidah, a prayer so central that it's known to the rabbis of the Talmud as Ha-Tefillah, the prayer. And we'll actually be spending 2 weeks on the Amidah itself. Next, there may be a Torah service, which is its own kind of interlude that goes on of public reading of the Torah and blessings that surround it. That doesn't happen every day. That doesn't happen when you're praying in your home by yourself, but we'll talk about that. And then there's some closing prayers. those are kind of the big main headings. You've got your warm-up, Shema, Amidah, maybe Torah, and then your cool down. So we can think of it as something like an arc. Oops. Okay. Oh, I didn't even think I meant to add animation to this slide. How fun. Okay, so let's get a little more, we'll get a little more detailed in this. So our warm-up, what's in the warm-up? These are things that on an everyday prayer service, there's those morning blessings that we talked about. There are collections of various psalms, different psalms that are said for the morning, weekday morning. There's actually traditions of there's a different psalm for each day of the week. So there's a psalm for Sunday, a psalm for Monday, a psalm for Tuesday, a psalm for Wednesday, for Thursday, etc. There's a collection of verses called Pesuke de Zimra. Pasuk is a verse, Zimra is song. So these are the songful verses, Pesuke de Zimra. Those kinds of things constitute the warm-up. That's kind of what a morning warm-up looks like. On Friday night, we have a warm-up as well. We have a Kabbalat Shabbat, the welcoming of the Sabbath service, where we sing a lot of psalms. So it kind of varies depending on which service we're doing, but the structure is still the same. Now Shema it's sort of the Shema section. They call it Shema Uvirteha, Shema and its blessings. So this is the part of the service that if you're praying with a minyan, with a quorum, that it starts with Baruch Hu, the call to prayer. So we'll get more into all that next week. Now we talked about the Amidah being the central prayer of Jewish worship, and that's why we're going to spend 2 weeks on it. Torah service, y'all may or may not know that the Torah is not just read publicly on Shabbat, but also on Mondays and Thursdays, which is kind of interesting and to me a little strange, but then I've heard it explained why Mondays and Thursdays. It's so that you read it on Shabbat, then you got your Sunday. Okay, start your week off on Monday with more Torah, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're never going more than 2 days or 2 or 3 days without hearing the Torah. That's what I've heard as the explanation. I think that's a practice that's said to date back to Ezra the scribe in the books of the writings. Okay, and our closing prayers. If you've attended Jewish prayer services, you're probably familiar with some of these. There may be more psalms. There's definitely going to be Aleinu, a prayer that originally was just for Rosh Hashanah, but people loved it so much they said, give it to us every day. You've probably heard the Kaddish. Of course, many of us know the mourner's Kaddish, but Kaddish is also a prayer that shows up throughout the liturgy as a way to demarcate transitions between sections. Okay. So I see in the chat, Mary's asking, are there Hebrew words for warm-up and closing? There definitely are Hebrew words for these words, but this terminology is just my own. So I think that the Hebrew words that may be used for some of the morning, for some of the intro stuff, depends on the service. So, we could talk in the morning about Pesuke de Zimra, we could talk on Friday nights about Kabbalat Shabbat, but they still function as sort of the warm-up, introduction, closing kind of stuff. I'm not sure if there are, if there's a more technical term for it, but I can look that up and get back to y'all. Okay. Any questions about this so far? We're gonna dig a bit more into especially the warm-up section tonight. But any questions about this 5-part structure? Aha, so Lee is asking a great question. Moda'ani or mode'ani, is that part of the warm-up of the morning service? Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, so mode'ani is a prayer that some people say upon arising, first thing, getting out of bed. But I would consider that part of the warm-up. Yeah. Any other questions about this service structure? One thing that I'll say is that each service follows this same basic structure, except when it doesn't. And one particular time when it doesn't is Mincha. Mincha is like a midday piece of a service. It's a service unto itself, but there's no warm-up. And actually, you may or may not know, but the Shema is said just twice a day. In some senses, 3 times a day, because you might say it in the morning as part of Mariv, and then a special Shema when you're actually going to sleep. But it's not said as part of Mincha. So Mincha is basically, you go into the Amidah, a couple Psalms, and if it's the right day of the week, a Torah reading. But for the most part, this kind of overarching structure will be useful because it's the same form, whether we're talking about an evening service in the weekday, Friday night evening service, Saturday morning Shabbat service, Monday morning davening at home, that kind of thing. Okay, well, let's get a little bit into this. All right. So here we have a scan of the Siddur, of the prayer book. This comes from Kol HaNeshama, the Reconstructionist prayer book. Now, who can look at what we are looking at? Who can look through this text? And, well, before we start asking questions, could I get someone to read out the English for us?
The Psalm of Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Okay. A Psalm of Thanksgiving. Sing out to the Creator, all the earth. Worship the all-seeing one in joy. Approach God's presence with a ringing cry. Know that the abundant one is God, the one who made us, our beginning and our source. We are God's kin, the flock God feeds. Enter God's gates with thankful prayers, God's courtyards with a song of praise. Give thanks to God, give blessing to the name. For the love of the compassionate will last forever, God's faithful care throughout all generations.
Thank you, Raz. Now, folks, what are some of the themes that we're dealing with here? Just, feel free to unmute and what are some of the themes? What are some of the ideas? What's some of the feelings that this prayer is invoking?
God's eternal.
Yeah.
Gratitude,
Mhm.
joy in prayer to God.
Expression of the spirit.
Mhm. Yeah, any other thoughts?
Love for God and God's love for us, and
Beautiful.
compassion.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Yeah, so this is kind of a great kind of typical example of what a lot of the Psalms look like. So this comes from the Psalms. This is Psalm 100. And this is what a lot of Psalms look like. Quite self-referential, quite in the sense that it's a prayer telling you to pray, and we're excited that we are praying and that kind of thing. Um, yeah, Psalms of praise. Yeah. Um, so who can tell me where in the service this fits based on our five-part structure? Yeah, Victoria.
The warm up,
Yeah, how do you know?
um, because, because of the praise element, of course. Offering to God, being thanks, and kind of, again, it definitely is a practice that warms you up for the more stylized and service oriented work, prayer.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one thing that I've heard is that that one way of thinking about Jewish prayer is that it's moving through various dimensions of our experience. And so it starts with the body. Modeh ani, I'm thankful for waking up. It starts with the body, the morning blessings that are about opening our eyes, being able to tell the difference between day and night, being able to stretch out, being able to stand up on the earth or um, to move our body in different ways, being able to use the bathroom if we need to, that kind of stuff. It starts with the body. And then it goes into the heart. And these matters of the warm up this is the body taking us from the body into the heart. So here, this is the stuff that's supposed to arouse the heart. Sing out to God. We're going to come up with a great melody for this. We're going to sing it. You know, these psalms are where, if you start learning Hebrew, you'll learn that there's like, 100 different Hebrew words for jubilation, prayer, exultation, and shouts of joy, cries of joy, all this kinds of stuff. The Psalms are rife with this kind of language. And the idea is that in reciting these words, that you're mustering up the feelings as well. So there's, following that model, going from the body to the heart, from physicality to the realm of sort of emotions and feelings. One theoretically ascends into the realm of thought and then the realm of spirit. But for now, we're going to stay in the body-heart side of things. Okay. Now, can anyone tell me, based on what you're seeing here, so we know it's in the warm-up. Do we know what section of the warm-up or when this prayer would be said? Any days in particular? Just want to test people a little bit on their, see what people can pick up from the information that's in front of us.
Maybe you would say it in the morning.
Yeah, it's definitely a morning thing. Yeah, and this is so. I don't expect everyone to know this because we're just kind of encountering it, some of us for the first time. But if you look on the bottom left, you'll see that it says Pesuke de Zimra. Now, you'll know that Pesuke de Zimra is part of the morning verses of praise.
Mhm.
But if you look at the bottom right,
Yep.
you'll
Shacharit.
see Shacharit, exactly. So not every Siddur features these helpful headings at the bottom of the page, footers, but many of them do. And so when you're looking through the Siddur, I would say maybe even most Siddurim nowadays, especially if they include English, will have these kinds of headings so that you can understand what's happening, what page you need to get to. Okay. Any questions, comments about this so far?
Is this a Siddur that the Tekiah congregation uses in services?
Yes.
So can you say which, is that page 38 or how does that work? Where could we find it?
Yeah, this is on page 38.
Yep.
I actually have the Kol HaNeshama Siddur right next to me, and it occurs to me that the scan is from the weekday Siddur, not the Shabbat V'Chagim Siddur.
Right.
So there's a separate prayer book that's used for weekdays versus Shabbat and holidays, just to accommodate all of the extra content.
So how can we get that? What
I
copy?
will tell you. You can get it. It's available for purchase from the Reconstructionist movement, or for free digitally. And I will be putting the links in the chat in just a moment, because we're actually going to do a little activity. Now, one thing that I think I've alluded to but haven't fully mentioned is that when it comes to these 5 parts, these are the headings, but there may be several or many prayers in each section. Does that make sense? So warm-up is not just one prayer. Warm-up could be many sections of prayers. Birkot HaShachar, Pesukei de Zimra, the morning blessings, the verses of praise, plus other content. And those, what content is said, that does differ, based on whether it's Shabbat or a weekday and those kinds of things. But these are the headings that are rather fixed. Victoria.
Jake, with Shabbat Kabbalah, you separate our service into 4, maybe 5 sections, don't you? That we move from one part of the service to another. Do they correspond with 1 through 5 here?
Yeah, so it sort of depends. So Kabbalat Shabbat, the Friday night service, is a little, there's something special about Kabbalat Shabbat, that the main distinction that happens in Kabbalat Shabbat is distinguishing between Kabbalat Shabbat, which is our warm-up, and Ma'ariv, the Ma'ariv evening service that starts with the Baruch Hu. And the reason is that Kabbalat Shabbat is a newer tradition to sing all these psalms, to sing all these kinds of beautiful psalms and really spend a lot of time on that, is an innovation that comes about in 16th century Tzfat, in the land of Israel, by Kabbalists, by mystics who wanted to do something extra special to welcome in Shabbat. So that's one of the differentiations that we use on Friday nights. Once we're in Mariv, it follows the same. It follows the same overarching structure, that we do the Baruch Hu and the stuff around the Shema, then we do the Amidah and the stuff around it, and then we do some closing stuff. So it still follows the same kind of structure. And I should note that oftentimes these distinctive parts are moments, especially between the warm-up and the Shema, are moments where there may be a switch in leadership in who's leading the service. So that happens rather traditionally, that someone might lead Pesukei de Zimra, the Psalms of Praise, and then pass it over to someone else to lead the rest of the service, starting with the Baruch Hu. Okie dokie. Any more questions before we move on? Okay, yeah, I know it can be a little confusing if we're sort of talking just about prayer rather than talking about the prayers themselves. But getting to know
Jake,
the structure is I think will serve us well.
Jake,
Yeah.
may I ask you a question? So, are we gonna get into like the Eleno and these specific things? Like, is 1 week gonna be for this so we can kind of try to learn some of these things? Or
Yeah, we're definitely. So next week we're going to focus on the Shema, and we're going to do a deep dive on Shema. Then the following 2 weeks will be a deep dive on the Amidah, and then our final class will be kind of a smattering of things that we hadn't yet covered. And I'm thinking it will be the Kaddish, Aleinu, perhaps the long Shabbat Kiddush, the things like that. So this is tonight is a little bit more theoretical. We're kind of getting a framework for how to understand the prayer service, the structure, so that once we start learning the parts, we kind of know how to handle them and where to put them. Does that make sense?
of course.
Cool. Okay, so what we'll do now is we're going to do a little, wow, I really don't think that I meant to click any of those animation buttons and they just came in. Okay, what we'll do now is we're going to be exploring this warm-up portion of the Siddur. So if you have a Siddur nearby, grab it. If you don't, I will put the links for the I'll put the links for the digital copies of the Siddur in the chat. Here is both a Shabbat and holiday prayer book and a weekday prayer book, courtesy of Reconstructing Judaism. And I want you to look in the Siddur and try to find an example of some warm-up content. First, let's look for some warm-up content in Kabbalat Shabbat. Okay, so let's see, raise your hand if you have a physical Siddur on hand. Okay. And then can folks raise their hand if they are able to access the digital Siddur? Okay, so some folks are looking physically and some folks are looking digitally. Awesome. So our first task, we can think of it as kind of the Siddur scavenger hunt. Our first task is to look for some warm-up prayer from Kabbalat Shabbat. So I'll tell you right away that you should be looking in the Shabbat and Chagim Siddur, which is the first link that I posted. And raise your hand when you find something that's a warm-up prayer, an example of some warm-up material. We'll give folks a couple moments to, you can put your Zoom hands up and I'll call on someone to share with us what they found. All right, Robin, you want to share with us?
Sure. So I'm on the digital version that you shared. And it really seems like starting at page 1, we're in the warm-up prayers for Kabbalat Shabbat. And on page 6, I'm here, there's a psalm begins, how splendid is your light, which worlds do reflect. Your soul is worn from craving for your love's delight. Goes on from there.
Yeah, perfect. And that's actually you'll see on the bottom part of the slide here, I have I say, notice what kinds of imagery you see coming up. It's all very juicy, vivid stuff. What you've cited is from the Friday night prayer called Yedid Nefesh, which means soul beloved, my soul's beloved. That one's very, very juicy, very passionate. Definitely a warm up, kind of as you can discern from it being on just page 6 of Kabbalat Shabbat. You know that it's some of the introductory material. It's there to get us in the mood for Shabbat. And there's a classic Ashkenazi melody that for a lot of people, when they hear it, it activates that Shabbat feeling. Ya da 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 ya ba 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 ya da 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 da. So yeah, Yedid Nefesh, great Shabbat warm-up material. Yeah, Robin.
A question: do you have any ideas for resources for those sorts of finding recordings of those kinds of melodies for the prayers and people singing the prayers?
Yeah, definitely. One that I'll send out, and I'll mention it now as well, is that an organization called Hadar, which can be found at hadar.org, Hadar, has done a wonderful, wonderful project of cataloging various tunes for different prayers, and including the classics, the sort of standards, and then some interesting and unusual ones and contemporary settings and that stuff too. Yeah, so Hadar is one, and another called Zmirot database. Zemer is a kind of song, Zmirot, and so the Zmirot database is another one. But I'll make sure to include those links in our follow-up email.
Thank you.
Cool, and it looks like Roz, you found something too?
Yeah, there is the one that we all know at the beginning of the service, Shalom Aleichem, but one of my favorites is on page 25, Shiru Ladonai. That one. Very spirited melody.
Yeah, definitely. The Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, Shiru Ladonai, let us sing to Adonai, Psalm 96.
Psalm 96, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's what's funny is that if you look through the Psalms, you'll see a number of them, a host of them are Shiru Ladonai, which is true to form, that these Psalms would begin with an adjuration to sing to God. Yeah, this one, you may know this one to a tune of, there's a very famous tune by Shlomo Carlebach, who is a controversial and influential rabbi who composed a lot of beautiful melodies and also caused a great deal of harm in Jewish community. But so with that caveat, I'll say that a melody of his that you might be familiar with from Psalm 96 is Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Yeah, you may have heard that one, and it can go as a nigun, as a wordless melody as well. Okay, Lee, you've got your hand up.
I do. I was just looking, and I think this would fall into the warm-up category, but I'm not sure it's exactly what you meant. The blessing for the Talit, and it's kind of getting officially dressed for the service, kind of. It feels like to me always. So I thought that was a good part of the warm-up, perhaps.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so I think it would fit. I think in response to this and to Victoria's question in the chat about is the blessing for candlelighting part of the warm up? So warm up is, this is a category that I'm imposing on here for heuristic, explanatory purposes. So, we need not trouble ourselves too much about does this neatly fit into this category or not. But I think that both of these would. The blessing for the talit, that it's part of you're preparing your body, you're preparing your physicality to show up to prayer. Similarly with kindling the lights of Shabbat, that you're bringing in the light physically to move into the spiritual practice of prayer. Okay, cool. So, interesting question from Stacy. If I wanted to install these prayers into my daily life, how much time does it take on average? So I would say it depends on what you do, which I think is a good comment to bring us to this next slide here. Here is the table of contents from the Reconstructionist weekday Siddur. So as I mentioned, some Siddurim, it's quite common that some prayer books are listed for either weekday use or for Shabbat and festival use. Some of them contain them all. And it's just kind of a matter of choice for the publisher and that kind of stuff. I should also note that a lot of Siddurim, especially nowadays, are filled with not just the traditional prayers, but also contemporary poetry, reflections, meditations, guided imagery exercises, all kinds of things like that. And that is there to help you, to help your spiritual life and your devotional life. So that is why some prayer books are very, very thick and some prayer books are very, very thin. There are differences about which prayers get included in the book, but it's also about what additional stuff goes in there. So, so Stacy was asking if I wanted to do this as a daily practice, how much time would it take on average? So let's see. It really depends on how you pray, because for people who have the formal prayer of, say, the Amidah internalized to the point where they can just kind of rattle it off and go through the words, you can say the Amidah in just a couple minutes. You can do your morning davening as a 10-minute practice, a 15-minute practice, that kinds of stuff. So it matters as some of the factors that affect that are your familiarity, your comfort level, how much time you're spending on what you're doing, how much attention and how you pace yourself, but then also what prayers do you do? We'll learn that the most essential portions of the prayer service are the Shema and the Amidah. If you only have time for the Shema and Amidah, the rest of the stuff is just there to help, it's the warm-up. It's there to help get you there. But if you only have a limited time to pray, you can pray Shema and Amidah. Some people say if you only have time to pray, you can just do Shema. If you only have a very limited amount of time. There's even an abbreviated form of the Amidah that's meant to be said. Traditionally, I think it comes from the Talmud, and it's said to be given for folks who are in danger, like a robber or some kind of bandit is chasing you. There's a very short Amidah that you can say for that purpose. So it really varies. But I would say Shacharit, probably you can, an at-home Shacharit, I would say would probably, you could do from about 15 minutes to 1 hour of practice and get through Shacharit. It's said, we touched on this Mishnah last time, but there are traditions that say that the holy ones of old used to meditate for an hour before prayer to get in the spirit, and then they would pray for an hour, and then they would like come down for an hour. They'd have their reintegration into the world for an hour because they were so transcendent and so up there. So that's one option, I suppose. But so Shacharit, I would say, yeah, maybe 15 minutes to an hour. Mincha is super short, as you can see in the, on screen towards the bottom half on the left-hand side, the afternoon service. It starts with the Amidah. That's really just a handful of prayers, so that's a 15 to 20 minute happening. That's a lunch break kind of thing, Mincha. And Mariv is also quite short. You do Shema, you do Amidah, Psalm for the day. So there's not as much going on in the warm-up, if anything, or not as much that's sort of traditionally set as a requirement for the warm-up. And then you do Shema Amidah, and then a little bit of come down. So what I've done in highlighting this table of contents is to show the various elements that we've addressed. So in red, we see our sort of warm-up material on the Shacharit morning service. Orange, Shema and its blessings. Yellow, the Amidah and the material that accompanies it. You can see in green that there's a Torah service sometimes, and blue for the coming down. So really, even though they all kind of, follow a similar structure, we can approach them in similar ways. Shacharit is the heavy dose of davening for the day, and that kind of makes sense that you're getting a lot of spiritual practice in early on to set you up right for the day. Okay. Questions about this so far? We'll cover I think just kind of one more thing of content, and then we can just do some freeform question and answer even before 8:30. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to point out was that there is a lot here. And this is the Reconstructionist version. If you were to look in an Orthodox Siddur, there's a lot more. The warm-up is considerable, and the warm-up includes you're saying prayers, you're saying blessings, you're reading bits of Torah, you're studying bits of Talmud, you're recounting the order of the sacrifices and how the sacrifice happens and things like that. Whole sections on that, various rules, and that's even before you get to Pasukei de Zimra, before you get to the actual verses of praise. So there's a lot that tradition has added on to this fundamental structure and turned into obligations, turned into things that you have to do or that you're supposed to do. But the point is, we don't want anyone to be intimidated. When you receive a Siddur, when you receive a prayer book, and you see that it's like 400 pages, oh my gosh. Like, what are you going to do with that? Well, when you know kind of the structure, you're able to navigate it a bit more easily. And when you know that, okay, if I can only have time for Shema and Amidah, I actually don't need the rest of the stuff. That's great. So knowing a bit how to find your way through the Siddur can make things a lot more attainable. It also helps you to know what's going on when you show up to synagogue, maybe late, maybe you're at a community where they're not very good at announcing the page numbers, and you know, oh my gosh, I have to find my way to the Amidah. Well, once you know the structure, you know, okay, let me get through all this material that says Shacharit, that says Psalms. Oh, it's past the Shema. Oh, but if I hit the Mourner's Kaddish, I've gone too far. So you got to find your way in the middle. But I want to share this little bit of advice from Rabbi David Teutsch from the Reconstructionist movement. Can we get a reader for this?
Sure, I can read it.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
It is suggested that, that beginners at daily worship start with relatively small parts of the liturgy and get to know them slowly rather than feel an obligation to race through an amount of text too large to absorb. It is better to make a modest commitment to pray for 10 minutes a day than to attempt a grand plan that might collapse when your schedule becomes more demanding. Each person will find that a different combination of melody and text, readings, studies, and meditation will provide the best personal nurturance and growth. Each individual should seek out his her own way and expect that it will change over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit of practical advice that, you know, we see the Siddur and it's big and there's a lot in it. And even if we're, especially if we're enthusiastic to develop a deeper connection with our Jewish identity, with a relationship with the divine, with God, with whatever, we may think, all right, you know, we make one of those grand plans to say, okay, I'm going to daven every day. I'm going to do the whole thing. And that's how I'm going to live the life that I want to live. Like, no, that's going to fall short. Work your way up, start small. And so the homework for this week is to look for 3 prayers that that are in the warm-up category of things, and all the better. Ideally, will be 3 prayers that speak to you. Find 3 prayers that speak to you, 3 warm-up prayers that speak to you, because there's so much text, and we have to understand that the Siddur was not given as a constructed document that came as a fully sealed package all at once. This is the product of history. This is the product of years and years and years of development and reprinting and translations and additions and changes, and in some cases editing out of material that people no longer felt good about. So that's certainly the case in the more progressive realms of Judaism, but it's also the case in just various traditional communities where people said, actually, wait a minute, we shouldn't be praying this way. And various authorities came in and changed things. So the Siddur is, it's in some ways, it's had a lot of hands in it, and in some ways it's not raw, but it's not fully cooked either. You know, it's like somewhere in between, and it's on to us to figure out how can we make this work for ourselves? How can we figure out, okay, what are our personal highlights in the davening? And if there's, as Jews who want to take liberties with tradition, who want to embrace tradition, but also feel empowered to wrestle with it, to interrogate it, to challenge it, we should find the parts that speak to us And we should emphasize those parts. It shouldn't be a slog. It shouldn't be there's Jewish language that speaks of Jewish practice as a yoke, as a kind of burden that we take onto ourselves. And I see some meaning in that. I see some spiritual meaning in that. But I also think that fundamentally this should be a life-affirming tradition. So we should be seeking out those elements of tradition that speak to us and emphasizing those. So I hope that this little bit of orientation to the structure of Jewish prayer has been helpful. Again, the idea is that in knowing some of these main headings, we can find our way through. We have a little bit of something to hold on to when the prayer service is going on around us, or when we're sitting by ourselves and all of a sudden we realize that this book is huge and we don't speak the language and we don't know where to even begin. Now we at least know where to begin. And you can begin at the beginning. Okay, so I think that'll be it for our content tonight. And I'll just remind us that we'll gather at the same time next week, 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday the 17th, and we'll get into the Shema. And for that session, we will actually be looking at the words of the Shema, word by word. Hopefully you'll come away from that with a real internalized sense of the meaning of the Shema. I want to invite people to, if you want to give some of this praying a try, join us at Techia for Shabbat services. This week, we're doing services on Friday night, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, online at www.techia.org/Zoom. And we can get you the password if you need it, or you can check your Techia times. And I think that's it for tonight. I'll stop the recording and stay on for some question and answer. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.